Hey everyone, this is Kale. So before Bridgid came down to film our video, Chris and I went to our local home center to pick up the supplies. Here you'll see all the materials that we picked up, what to look for when picking up materials, and other materials and tools that you can find in your home center that would help you with this chair build. Chris and I's first stop of the day was the Home Depot. Once we were inside, I had my list of things ready to go. We headed straight for the replacement hole digger handles. In the book, this is what Chris uses for his chair legs. While they didn't have the exact handle that Chris used in his original chair, they did have this. This is a replacement shovel handle that was relatively cheap. For one handle, we were able to get 2 legs out of it. So once I measured the diameter and saw that it was wide enough for our tenon, we basically pulled every one from the shelf and put it in the cart. And then we began checking the grain. So because grain direction is so important when picking chair legs, I'm going to slow things down to show you what to look for. The biggest thing you're looking for when reading grain are things called cathedrals. Cathedrals are those conical shaped arrow looking things that you see on wood grain. So let's pause and go back for a moment. On this particular handle, you can see those here and here. Cathedrals aren't great. Basically, they indicate that the grain is running diagonally instead of straight, and that is not what we want in a chair leg. The straighter the grain, the stronger the wood is, and that's what we're looking for. So now that we know what we don't want, this is what we do want. This handle is a perfect example of straight grain. Not a cathedral in sight, even the rays were straight. This was mwah, chef's kiss. So this handle was set to the side. I found 3 more handles that looked really good, and from there, Chris and I moved on to dowels. For dowels, it's a similar situation in that you want the straightest grain possible. However, you also need to check the straightness of the dowel itself. For this, I just put the dowels on the ground and kind of did a rolly test side to side. You can see that this one was pretty warped, so I put it back on the shelf. But this is a good way to rule those out. These are a few that we ended up leaving with. We actually couldn't find enough dowels, so this was the moment where Chris and I decided that we were going to have to go to a second home center. Right around the corner from the dowels were these handrails. Now, I know we already obtained our leg material, but we decided to get this just because it could be a good alternative. They had these really short handrails, which would have been great for just one leg, but we decided it would be cheaper to just get one large handrail and we would cut it down to size. Once we measured it out, this one long handrail was good for 5 chair legs. So with our handrail in tow, we were now ready to joust. Just kidding. It was time to move on to the seat and comb material. So this actually turned out to be the second reason why we had to head to a different home center. Once we got to the lumber aisle, we saw that they didn't have any yellow pine at all, which is what we wanted for our seat and comb. Chris and I just immediately moved on to plywood for the Armbo. Similar to the dowels, I wanted to make sure that this board wasn't warped in any way, so I put it on the ground, made sure it wasn't rocky. This board ended up being nice and flat, so I snatched it. Our last stop of the day at this home center was the paint aisle. We ended up going with this chalk paint just because it has a great matte finish and it covers really well with just one coat. We picked a color and we were off. Once everything was loaded up, it was time to head to our second home center of the day, which was Menards. When we got in, I immediately headed towards the dowels, but on my way to them, I passed this hickory stair tread, and I wanted to show this just because I thought this would be great wedge material. We didn't need to make any wedges, but I just wanted to show this as an option. So anyhow, I made my way to the dowels, and I just repeated the same process that I did earlier at the Home Depot. I looked for straight grain, I put them on the ground to make sure that the dowels themselves were straight, so on and so on. I eventually got all the dowels that we needed, so we were good to go from there. Next, Chris and I headed to the tool section. We wanted to show you that you don't need the fanciest of tools to build a chair. These are some examples of bits and tools that we actually use to build this chair. They even had the exact Rikon bandsaw that we use. Here it's $300, and yes, that's pricey, but if you can afford this, this is a genuinely good bandsaw that will last you for many, many years. Other examples of tools that you can get from the home center specifically for this project were things like a bevel gauge, a square, a level, even a yardstick. Chris was particularly excited about the clamps. If you can afford at least 4 of these 24-inch clamps, you're in good shape. That's really all you need for this project. On the way out, we also passed some block planes, chisels, and some wooden handled hammers. All of these things are really nice to have for this project. So just when Chris and I thought that we were finished, on the way back to the shop, we realized we totally forgot the yellow pine. So this prompted us to turn around and hit up our third home center of the day, which was Lowe's. Luckily, they had plenty of yellow pine once we got inside. Chris and I immediately began sifting through the boards to see which ones had the least cupping and cracks. So we picked a board that looked best to us, and finally, we were finished with our adventure of the day.
Hello, this is Bridgid here, hijacking the video feed. So one thing Kale didn't mention, because I believe they already had it in stock back at the shop, was the material we'll need to create our patterns. We'll create these hardboard patterns from our printout using this 5mm underlayment. And you'll need a 2-foot by 4-foot sheet of this stuff to create the pattern for our seat, comb, and Armbo. And there's a few other non-wood materials that you should pick up. We'll use spray adhesive in chapter 4 to secure our paper patterns to the underlayment. And of course, we'll need wood glue. This yellow glue here will work just fine. And lastly, I want to talk about the wooden pegs needed to attach the comb to the chair. You can buy 1/4 inch dowel for this operation, but I would hazard a guess that you already have the pegs you need for this chair in your kitchen. On this build, Kale and I used wooden chopsticks left over from a takeout order as the pegs. And on chairs I've built at home, I've used wooden barbecue skewers. Okay, back to Kale.
So that was it. Here's a look at everything that we picked up once we got back to the shop. Now all that's left to do is for Bridget and I to do our thing and build this chair.